Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Knife Chats with Tobias.
Hello everybody, Tobias here, and well, today is Veterans Day, November 11th. It's also Tuesday, so I thought I would do a 2 for Tuesday for veterans. And in this case, what I'm going to do is show you a couple bayonets from my collection. Both of these are U S Bayonets. The first one I will be talking about mostly is this one here. This is an M7 bayonet for the M16 rifle. And the other one I'm going to show looks very similar to this. And that is an M4 bayonet for the U.S. M1 carbine. I want to talk, this one is a little more interesting, but it's also very possibly what you could consider stolen valor, because this, unlike the other one I just showed you, was most likely never issued to the U.S. military, even though the U.S. military did have an M4 bayonet that looked very similar to this. Now, both of them fit into this style of scabbard, which is the M8 scabbard. And well, this is an M8A1 scabbard. The difference between an M8 scabbard and an M8A1 scabbard is this doohickey right up here, which allows you to hang it off of the web belt. The M8 does not have that, and it has just a strap so you can slip it onto a belt. But otherwise, it's about the same. And this will also be stamped M8A1. A number of companies made these. You will find them with and without a little metal reinforcement tip down here. They all have a hole in the bottom, though, for a tie-down loop or strap. In any case, this is a webbing portion up here, and then you've got the metal throat up here. And either of these bayonets will fit in this. The M8A1 scabbard was formed or first issued at the very end of World War II, and it has pretty much remained unchanged up until it went out of service, which was sometime in the 2000s. So this same M8A1 scabbard was used for every U.S. military bayonet, every U.S. military bayonet that was developed since World War II, all the way up until somewhere around 2010 or so. So a long life for this style of scabbard. Now, as I mentioned, this is the M4 bayonet. This is the M7 bayonet. I'm going to talk about the M7 bayonet first and then get back to that M4 bayonet. This was one that would have seen service in the Vietnam War, also every kind of military engagement since the Vietnam War. These were developed alongside of the U.S. M16 rifle. They were carried over and actually used with the M4 carbine afterwards, until basically these were replaced by the M9 bayonet. At least for the U.S. military. The Marines used a different style of bayonet than the Army. So when the Marines dumped the M7 bayonet, they went, I can't remember the number for the Marine knife. I'm not a Marine historian, sorry about that. I'll put it down here somewhere. In any case, this was also used by the U.S. Marines. It is still used by the United States Air Force, I believe, and it might also still be used by the United States Navy. So it is still being used today, a good, 60, 70, 80, 90, 10, a good 60 years into service. So a long service life for this bayonet. Now, this particular bayonet was made by BOC, the Bauer Ordnance Company. And on the other side, you can see, I think, US M7. And that's the way these blades were stamped, regardless of what company that made them. One side would say the company's name or initials or something like that, and then the other side would say US M7. And this is a practice that began all the way back in World War II. Original ones might have even been stamped on the blade, but they stopped stamping them on the blade because it would cause a stress point on the blade, which could cause the blade to break. So they decided to just start stamping them on the guard. And so after World War II, basically, all of them were stamped that way, because this same style of blade, this blade, which is basically a 6 3/4 inch blade that you found on the original M3 trench knife, has the sharpened edge down here and then a sharpened top up here. And then this part is left alone so you can have some nice strength there, about 1/8 of an inch thick or so. Same blade ended up being used for every subsequent made bayonets since the M4 Bayonet, which was originally made for the M1 carbine. Sometime shortly after the Korean War, in actually 1953, they came up with a design for a new bayonet for the M1 Garand rifle, but it was not issued until after Korea, which was the M5 or M5-1 bayonet. And then using this same blade, just a different guard and a different handle. And then they also had the M6 bayonet for the M14 rifle, which was very short-lived, but still used this same blade. And then finally the M16 rifle came out with this one. This would be the M7 Bayonet. So bayonets were M4, M5, M6, M7, but the sheath was the M8 or M8A1 sheath, or scabbard, whichever way you want to call it. But this one is the M16. I do have the M5 and the M6, and I'll show those in a future video. The way you can easily tell this is the M16 bayonet is because of the size of the barrel ring on the blade, or on the guard here. Notice how large that ring is. It's a very large ring on top of the guard, and it's very close to the handle. Then also the backside here, the way the pommel attaches to the bayonet lug on the rifle. You've got the two buttons here that stick out a little bit, and that was done so that you could easily do this even in cold weather, so that you could actually push down on these. So it was designed, even though the first place these things ended up getting, serious use was during the Vietnam War. This was really designed with these buttons sticking out so that you could easily use heavy Arctic mittens and still release the bayonet from the rifle barrel, because they were really still looking at the purpose of this is most likely, Cold War, fighting the Russians and so on and so forth. One of the interesting things on here is the plastic handle. It's just like a diamond groove on the handle for grip and everything, and then it is held in place by two screws, flathead screws, that screw into the opposite side here. It's not screwed on both sides, and that is just the way it is attached to the handle. And the cool thing about this, and why I wanted to show you the M4 alongside of this, is because the very last bayonets made for the M4 carbine, or I'm sorry, the M1 carbine, this was actually used on the M4 carbine, which was a derivative of the AR-15/M16. So the AR-15 platform, these were even used with the M4 carbines, because these actually are still in service, at least with the Air Force.
Okay, now I'm going to move away from the M7 bayonet that was used with the M16 and the M4 carbine and talk a little bit about the M4 bayonet that was used with the M1 carbine.
Notice the size of the barrel ring here, a much smaller barrel ring compared to the M16. That is the obvious difference between those. Also, you have a rounded pommel, and you have the two clips here, so it is similar in design to the to the one for the M16, but not exactly the same. Now, the interesting thing about this is the markings on here, because as you can see right there, it says M4 Camillus. Yeah, US M4 Camillus. And on the back side here, you see the SP down here, and then all these other markings up here. All of these markings on here are some of these markings that you would have found on a late World War II version of the Camillus M4 Bayonet, including right here, if we can see that, the ordnance bomb right there on the bottom there. All of these are late World War II, like 1944 or 45 markings that would show up on an M1 carbine's bayonet, for the M4 bayonet for the M1 carbine at the end of the war. Okay, a little bit of history lesson here. Back in World War II, most M1 carbines did not come with a bayonet. They came with the M3 trench knife. Now, this is not an original M3 trench knife from World War II. I know that because it says Ontario. Ontario did not make M3 trench knives during World War II. This is an aftermarket knife that was designed sometime after Camillus closed. Matter of fact, this was started off as a Camillus blank. Camillus also issued some M3 trench knives. Look very much like this. Any case, during the war, the M1 carbine did not have bayonet lugs, so there was no way to attach a bayonet to it. However, a lot of soldiers wanted that bayonet on there, so they started converting their M1 carbines so that they could actually mount a bayonet to it. And the bayonet that most often got hooked onto it was usually either the Japanese Type 30 bayonet or an M1 bayonet for the M1 rifle instead of the M1 carbine. And this was primarily happening in the Pacific, not in Northwest Europe, even though there are examples of M1 carbines in Europe also receiving some kind of treatment to get that done. That was just locally done stuff. But it was also really clearly made, especially from the Pacific to the War Department, that we need a bayonet for the M1 carbine. So they started looking at a way to design one, and the starting point was the M3 trench knife. And that turned into something like this. And the original ones did have a leather handle, just like this. And if you notice the semi-rounded pommel there, they took that rounded pommel and they changed it so that it could hook onto a bayonet lug. And then they just swapped out the guard and put a barrel ring into the top of the guard, and the M4 bayonet was created. Like I said, the original ones, leather handle. They also ended up having some that had wood handles. There's even ones out there that have a metal handle, but some of those are either, shop done or whatever. But the original ones, the original War Department issued ones, military issue, Army issue, whatever you want to call it, had a leather handle similar to what you had on the M3 trench knife. They were looking for something better. And so around 1954 or so, they experimented with the idea of coming out with one with this plastic handle. Now, as I mentioned, during World War II, most of the M1 carbines did not have or were not issued with a bayonet. And even when they started first issuing bayonets for the M1 carbines, a lot of the carbines did not have the bayonet lugs yet. So they would get a bayonet with it because they were phasing out the M3 trench knife. And there were actually some M4 bayonets that were stamped M3 on the blade. That's what was happening. They called them back and said, no, we're not doing trench knives anymore, fellas. We're just going to make an M4 bayonet. So use up your stock, So that was what was happening. But where the M4 bayonet with the M1 carbine really started seeing major service was during the Korean War. And it was during the Korean War that they were seeing issues with the leather handles and other handles like that. And they were experimenting with some other idea of coming out with a new handle. And they settled on a plastic handle. And that's where this handle first shows up on the M4 carbine shortly after the Korean War again. So somewhere around 1954, 55 or so, there was a contract issued for plastic handles for the M4 or for the M4 bayonet. And if you notice, that handle looks very similar to what you have on the M16. Matter of fact, they are interchangeable. The only way you can tell the difference is when you open it up and look at it, and these can easily be taken off and put back on. And that's what I think I have here with this M4 bayonet. It is not a actually government issued knife or bayonet. But I really can't say for certain because this mark, US M4 Camillus, that is accurate, as is the little ordnance bomb on the back. But this is accurate for a knife that would have been produced in 1944 or so by Camillus for service at the end of World War II. The same goes for the marking on the pommel here. This is a late war pommel on here. Now, there are rumors floating around and everything that say that not only did the U.S. military have a contract in 1954 for a couple companies to make these knives, but they also took knives that were damaged, removed the leather handles, and put these handles on there. There's no evidence of that contract existing, though. At least there wasn't as of 2013. Maybe some new information has come out, but the most of the information I've seen on this show no information of that happening, that such a knife would have happened. That they replaced handles on older knives. Everything about these two marks are right. But the other thing that is confusing with this, though, is one of the companies that made these knives, the M4 bayonets with the plastic handles, made them from blades that were supplied by Camillus. Could they have also had guards supplied by Camillus? Because, I don't know, but I seriously doubt it. And that company actually had their marking stamped on there. The company name was TMN. It would have been TMN stamped there instead of Camillus. It would have said USM4, and then it was said TMN instead of Camillus if it was made by that company. This part here, this was supplied by a different subcontractor, even in World War II, also in the 1954 contract. So it's really hard for me to say, but my feeling, especially considering the length of the blade on this, the typical length of the blade for these things is 6 3/4 inches. This one is 6 3/8 of an inch. So the blade is a little shorter than what it should have been. Again, that doesn't mean it isn't the true thing, because my M6 bayonet has a 6.5 inch blade. I know that one is correct. So the blade's a little shorter, and the markings are for a World War II variant of the M4 bayonet, and the handle is definitely something that should have been put on a bayonet in 1954. So my feeling is most likely this knife was made commercially using parts. Were the parts really for an M4? Notice that it is a little loose. Was this also something that they got contracted, or was this a new blade that was put on parts of an old M4 bayonet that was originally from Camillus and then changed? You know, I don't know. I really do not know. But my best guess is, yeah, this is a commercially produced knife that is marked and sold as something that was an issued bayonet. There are other M4 bayonets out there that are definitely made for the commercial market. I have one from Camillus as well, but it is not marked the same as this one. It does not have the ordnance mark on the back of the crossguard. So that's why I'm looking at this one more as stolen valor, because this one was made to appear to be something that was issued to the U.S. military, even though it was probably made for the commercial market, as opposed to this one, which I know for certain was actually U.S. military because it came from an arms room in the United States Army. In any case, thought I would share that with you for Veterans Day. At least you know this one's the real deal. And this one, if you run across it, be very skeptical of any M4 bayonets you see with a plastic handle. There's a very good chance that it was something that was commercially produced and is not the real deal. With that said, stick around for some slides of both of these bayonets, and I will talk to you again soon.
Let me take just a second to thank you once again for dropping by and spending a few minutes here at Knife Chats with Tobias. I really do appreciate it, and I do appreciate any comments that you leave. So please remember to give me that thumbs up, and also don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll know when the next episode is up and running. Thanks again for dropping by. Really do appreciate your time here.